So I was given a topic, and it was humility. And it's very interesting because right off the bat, if it was something like generosity or kindness or whatever, I would have been able to sort of pinpoint it, and I would have thought, well, everybody sort of says, well, yeah, no, kindness, generosity, that's me, or I do that, or I get that. Humility, though, I came to realize in the last month or so, whenever Meredith originally gave it to me, sort of defies description, and is sort of, I think, a word and a concept that, especially these days, is very hard to embrace or even believe exists anymore. So I really wanted to go back and say, okay, how, what is humility? And so I looked and I went back with, asked friends and whatever. First thing you do when you're really trying to figure out something is you go to Wikipedia these days. And Wikipedia was, the interesting thing is that first of all, everything from Wikipedia really came from a religious or spiritual concept about humility. And the very first thing, humility, is variously seen as the act or posture of lowering oneself in relation to others, or conversely, having a clear perspective and respect for one's place in context. And this I like too, humility in various interpretations is widely seen as a virtue in many religious and philosophical traditions, often in contrast to narcissism, hubris, and other forms of pride. So we got that there. And then I started asking friends and different folks, and who you get a little time to speak with. And Aggie, who works with me, is our managing director at the Lenzik, came up with the best line, as far as I'm concerned, to sort of begin the whole thing. I would have liked to begin it with this, but I sort of had to get us to this moment. She said, humility itself is not something that can be spoken of, it can only be practiced. And I really like that. Then she put, though, in however, ... which helped me a great deal. And then Kristen, who cuts my hair, and that's where you talk to people about things. And this was lovely because she said it, and then I asked her to email to me because I liked what she came up with. Humility is truly a gem suspended in the web of all life. To know humility is to fall from hubris or egotism. We feel superior and invincible, and then something happens. Our wings are clipped by an experience. We find ourselves escorted back to the web, which we had tried so hard to leave behind. We are upset because we believed we were better than the web. This return feels like shame, awe, and modesty. The beauty of this return to humility is that it reminds us of our connectedness to this web of life. We are indeed equals, and therein lies the gem. Beautiful. 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 Then I thought, well, let's see what people we respect, we admire, who we would imagine maybe would have something to say about humility. So Mother Teresa, a good place to go. And this is from Mother Teresa. These are the few ways we can practice humility. To speak as little as possible of oneself, it's a good one. To mind one's own business, which I think means probably avoiding gossip. Not to want to manage other people's affairs. This is the only one I had trouble with, to avoid curiosity. I thought that was intriguing, but to accept contradictions and correction cheerfully, to pass over the mistake of others, not being judgmental, to accept insults and injuries, to accept being slighted, forgotten and disliked, to be kind and gentle even under provocation, never to stand on one's dignity, and the end I love, to choose always the hardest. I thought that was great. Then another one, and it's funny, I'm not a huge fan of his, but I thought this was probably the best quote I saw from where I want to go with is from C.S. Lewis. And it was, true humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. So let me do that one more time, because I think this is, true humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. So I thought that was a great one. Then my chiropractor, we, that's what you do in a month, you know, you get your, well, we started, you know, a little bit was, from him was, the word he came up with, I liked very much, was unconditional. Unconditional was something that came up with him. Being a good sport, we talked about sportsmanship, you know, the idea of that. We talked about humble pie, and we talked about the ingredients of humble pie, and we weren't quite sure what that was. And we know that it's a cousin of eating crow. So it's not crow pie, but it's eating crow we were talking about. And then we talked a lot about manners. We talked a lot about the simplicity of manners and the fact that as a lost part of our culture, it's sad because it's a very small thing that puts somebody before you in some ways or acknowledges what they've done. My dad, I grew up in LA, and my dad came from Peoria, Illinois. And my dad instilled in me that kind of, when somebody, you know, you open the door for a woman, you stand up on the bus, you give it to an elderly person, you say thank you. My mother, you have to write a thank you card, all of that stuff, I snarled at, you know, but I did, and it got embedded in me. And it got so embedded in me that as I became radical and started lashing out at all of it, and my parents and the culture and everything, had hair down to here, experimenting with everything, everywhere, I still would open the door for an older person. I still would say please and thank you. I found myself, I thought, well, that's interesting. I should be rebelling against that, because that's all about this, you know, this white patriarch GOP society that I disdain. But then I came to realize, well, actually, that little courtesy it's maybe not such a bad thing. Maybe it's not such a hideous fascist thing, you know. And the other thing with Mark's my chiropractor. I'll give you the numbers of everybody afterwards if you want to. Great haircut, and he really tweaked my neck last week. And put somebody before yourself. Actually respect their point of view. I'm going to say that one again. Actually respect their point of view. That's a big one to me. And then let's see, did I have anything else? Okay, this was just some general ones. So when do you have a humbling experience? You know, well, we thought loss of work, a divorce, a breakup of a relationship. Those, I mean, there are lots of other things, but those are the. Does humility equate weakness in our society now? Is it a strength or a weakness? And humiliation. How does humiliation come from humility? Because humiliation seems like a negative. You want to, you know, let's eat humble pie, eat crow, I'm going to humiliate you. You're certainly not humbling yourself with that. You're wanting them to be humbled by you basically bringing them down. Now, these are the ones that to me are the key in some ways. Taking responsibility, the simplicity of taking responsibility, and more than that one, listening, listening to somebody. Listening even harder when it's somebody that you think you just can't stand because they come from the other point of view or they're not you. Because when you listen to them, you're humbling yourself to them and respecting that even if everything they represent is contrary to you, by God, they still have a right to have that opinion. And I would say that the thing right now that I have the most trouble with in our culture and our society in this town is people jumping to conclusion, is making everything black and white, and is not humbling themselves to the fact that there could be another way of viewing it. That maybe you're not so right. That maybe our righteousness of the left is as evil and destructive as the righteousness of the right. So there I'm saying, well, I got to find things. So I go back into my old library and I get The Courage to Create from Rollo May with all my little marks and all my little things here and there. And there were lots of goodies. And I mean, because I'm not talking about creativity and all of that, I won't go into that. But this one I'd marked, I'd underlined it. And this was God knows how long ago that, you know, I went through this. But this is from Rollo May, so I'm going to take it seriously. People who claim to be absolutely convinced that their stand is the only right one are dangerous. Such conviction is the essence not only of dogmatism, but of its more destructive cousin, fanaticism. Fanaticism, our new friend in our world, fanaticism. And believe it or not, guys and gals, it's not just fanaticism out there of the worst, it's the fanaticism in this room even, of when we don't realize how our point of view and our self-importance, and in that, our arrogance and our self-righteousness is open to the world to see, and yet we think we're the, by God, best liberal. I vote for Obama. I care about everything. But if you humble yourself for a moment, if you use humility as a practice, would you feel that same way? Is that the way you would react to something? Is that the way you would talk? Or maybe would you listen just a little bit more? Maybe after today, if there's anything that comes out of this, is that maybe you listen just a little bit more to that person that you've never taken seriously, or you've been judgmental of, or has political views different than yours, so all of a sudden they're not even worth talking to, which is a shame. It's a real shame. It's the world we live in. Just to let you know also then about humiliation is Monica Lewinsky is, and Monica Lewinsky is very interesting, because here's somebody totally humiliated by the person who should have been not only humiliated, but discarded, and yet once again, the most popular politician in the world. So if we want to, next time, maybe in 3 months, you could bring me back and I'll talk about hypocrisy, because that's actually hypocrisy is probably the one that I would just go all over the map with. But just to let you know, and this is good, because Monica Lewinsky, instead of just like the joke and ha, let's give her some credit. She's evolved, and it says here, perhaps most interesting, in October, on stage at a Forbes conference, she spoke out for the first time about the digital harassment or cyberbullying that has affected everyone from female bloggers to Jennifer Lawrence to her. Quote, I lost my reputation. I was publicly identified as someone I didn't recognize, and I lost my sense of self, she told the crowd. She just took the declaration one step further last month on the main stage at TED in Vancouver, British Columbia, where she issued a biting cultural critique about humiliation as a commodity. The title of her 18-minute talk, and perhaps the line that best sums up her experience, which received a raucous standing ovation, was "The price of shame." The price of shame. 24/7 culture, the price of shame. And then the people that we look to who are our heroes. Brian Williams, who I never looked at as a hero, I have to say. I think I always sensed Brian Williams for who he was. But new article, everything just coming out. The thing that people can't believe is, in this whole thing about his embellishing his stories, is that he couldn't actually say the words, I lied. I lied. I lied. I did wrong. I accept it. I accept responsibility for what I did. I am humbled by the fact that I got caught, and I'm gonna, yeah, right. They say NBC executives, and I know some people that have worked over the years at NBC, that everybody there has always known that he had, and this is a quote I got, a tendency to embellish. A tendency to embellish. I love that. It's like, is that ultimate? A tendency to embellish. It's like, I have a right to lie because I'm a journalist, even though it goes against the grain of everything I'm supposed to be. Well, let's be honest. It's like, it's great watching MSNBC, but sometimes I am so bored to tears by it, because I'd love to hear another opinion at that moment. I'd love to hear a dialogue. I would love to hear a dialogue. And I'd love to hear a dialogue where I hear voices that represent different positions. I tell people this, it's sort of funny. I have, Facebook, and I stroll through it. I have a very good friend who is very liberal, very radical to the left, who I grew up with in LA, and he's Jewish, and he ended up going to Israel. Arch Zionist now. He's a big entrepreneur, does very well. So I get all of his blasts on Facebook, which is obviously Netanyahu, our new hero. Then I have another friend who's an Asian poet that lives in San Francisco, and every Facebook I get from her is those Jews, those Zionists, the Palestinian, it's just, and I truly am getting the extremes of both, and I love it, and I realize, both of them are full of shit. When I read it, because there is somewhere in the middle where the story lies. There is somewhere in the middle where the story lies. Each side needs to have some humility to understand the other, or it's not going to go anywhere. It is going to get worse. Everything is going to fall apart. The infrastructure is going to fall apart. Communication is going to fall apart. Global politics will fall apart. It will. It will. And for all of us that sometimes are very pious and self-righteous in our progressivism, and I am challenging all of us, including me in this room, when was the last time that you actually had some humility in an interaction with somebody else who you didn't agree with? Just think about that. Just think about that. I'm sure that really why you all came here today is you wanted to hear me comment on the Dave Chappelle incident last week at the Lenzig Performing Arts Center. And the other two things I'm going to say before I say that, and then I'll sort of wind up maybe with that. The other thing that I also feel that permeates everything, and I haven't quite figured out the connection with humility, but maybe it is that fear right now, I think, is everything. I think that everything that motivates us, because of the fact that unless we want to get away from 24/7 culture, Facebook, internet, everything is fear. Everything is fear. Fear of the other, fear of the situation, fear. So that's an enemy. That's an enemy we have to work at. And as I say, the other one I feel is the lack of listening. The lack of listening. You know, I always think of Hillary's listening tour as an example of what not to do when you're actually listening, because the minute you start saying, I'm listening to you, I don't think that's where you want to start when you're doing it. I think you want to just listen. The other thing I realized when I was thinking about today is that, you know, we think about why is it so bad? Why is it so bad? And I thought for the powers that be who really want to eliminate a democracy, what is the best way to do it? And I thought polarization. Polarizing everybody against each other is the way that 1% continues. So it's not necessarily at the ballot box, it's in our own little communities, and it's not jumping to a conclusion quite as quickly. Being humble for a moment and saying to yourself, was that the full story? The only thing I can comment on about last week is that nobody saw the full story in context. Nobody. Nobody saw what led up to it. Nobody saw what happened before. Nobody knew what I went through with Live Nation. Nobody knows where this kid's head that threw the banana peel. We jumped, everybody, when I looked on the internet and everything else in this little community, my first thought was, everybody's ugly. Everybody's ugly. There's no hero. There's nobody coming good out of this. Because everybody jumped on their own particular bandwagon. Nobody did due diligence, and I doubt that anybody humbled themselves for even a second to ask the question, what really happened? So I think that's what I sort of want to leave all of us with is, and it goes back to what Aggie said, is that it really has to be a practice. It really does, because I feel very contradictory. I mean, talking about humility, but here I'm up here talking in front of you. And that's not an act of humility, you know. I don't think it's an act of arrogance or hubris, because I'm trying to think with you and, you know, and all that. But I think that it is that thing you have to take inside yourself, which is, do I practice that? Do I practice that with myself, you know, with my husband, wife, partner, lover, friend? Do I practice it in the work situation? Do I practice it with my elderly mother who drives me crazy but isn't going to change? And whose place is it to be humble for a moment, to understand what the situation is? So I think that's what I ask everybody, is just maybe, you know, think for yourself. When is humility something that I do want to use? Is it going to be helpful? And if I use it, what is it? What direction will it lead me in? Will I be thinking the same way? Will I be jumping to conclusions the same way? Will I be quite as knee-jerk in what I do? Or will I maybe, you know, take a few seconds, a few minutes, and actually think a little more before I say something, or write my post, or do whatever, which 9 times out of 10 is going to fuel the fire of the team you're already on. And I think it's about time that we start thinking about how the way the other team thinks without making them the devil and making them evil, because that is too simplistic and it doesn't get us anywhere. So, thanks everybody.